I've not done any videos on libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism recently because I've basically become a bit bored of it. Debates all tend to follow the same path, and it always boils down to fundamental issues of what's right and what's wrong, which is essentially a value call. If one person has different values than another, they'll never agree. So I thought I would make a video that highlights why I think it's pretty much a waste of time trying to debate these people. Libertarians want to insist that their ideology is all about personal choice and personal freedom, but it isn't. Libertarians want to impose their system on me. According to them, I must submit to the free market for everything, for my entire life, and I will have no other option. Some people think that's wrong and don't want it. Libertarians want to take a system of democratically elected representatives who spend public money on public projects, which is something that they think is wrong, and replace it with pure private enterprise, which is something I think is wrong. Well, what could possibly be wrong about private enterprise? Okay, there are people that don't agree with the idea that market forces will always produce the optimum outcome. Libertarians will tell you that a free market ensures the most efficient use of resources, and maybe that's true. To them, that efficiency is the optimum outcome. But what if you don't value efficiency above all else? That doesn't mean that you value inefficiency, although that's probably what a libertarian would tell you. It just means that the market should not be allowed to determine everything. Libertarians believe that the process of the free market automatically justifies its outcome. They believe if a service or product can't be sustained through market forces, then it doesn't deserve to exist. If somebody can't turn a profit by supplying something, then it shouldn't be supplied. To them, there is no such thing as intrinsic value, only market value. Libertarians label intrinsic value as a logical fallacy, and if you've ever had any dealings with them, you'll notice that they do love their logic. But what if you value faith more than logic? Well, another thing you may have noticed is how much libertarians like to bash anyone who believes in religion. Apparently faith is a personal freedom that you're not supposed to have. My personal views on that is I'm an atheist, but I really couldn't care less if somebody else believes in God or Jesus or the devil or whatever. I don't care. But libertarians will go to huge lengths to insist that a preference for faith is wrong and that their preference for logic is right. Faith is not a luxury that they're prepared to let you have. Equality, also not high on the list for libertarians. If the workings of a market makes 100 people incredibly rich and 100 billion people incredibly poor, then that outcome is justified because it's the most efficient use of resources. And sometimes they'll try to temper extreme examples like that by saying, well, that would never happen. But if you ask them, is it acceptable to interfere with the free market to ensure it never happens, every libertarian will say no. To them, the market is sacred, must not be touched. And not everyone agrees with that. That's how free markets work. Okay, fine. But declaring it as being simply right or the only way to do things is bullshit. That's your opinion on what's right. That's not what my opinion is on what's right. Libertarians often claim that they can prove the validity of their ideals through logic. They want to convince you that you do agree with their view of the world, and if you don't, then you're being inconsistent with your own standards. But even their logic relies on having common starting points. Some of you may have been subject to a particular quiz which starts off by asking if you think violence is wrong and ends up by supposedly proving that taxation is immoral. Again, it assumes that we all subscribe to the libertarian theories and definitions of right and wrong, and there's no room for deviation. So here are some of my challenges to libertarian doctrine. Number one, coercion is not wrong. The libertarian claim that freedom from coercion is the supreme social value is wrong. It's not wrong to secure justice by coercion. It's not wrong to enforce contracts by coercion or by threats of force. And that applies to the social contract as well as private contracts. The libertarian definitions of initiated force and retaliatory force is simply semantics, which requires people to accept their definitions of initiation, retaliation and property. If a black man drinks at a privately owned water fountain that says whites only, according to libertarians, that man is initiating force. If the owner stops him from drinking, then libertarians will say that's retaliatory force. Those definitions are not the same as my definitions. Libertarians are appalled that coercion is used to uphold rights and laws that they don't believe in. However, they see nothing wrong in using coercion to uphold what others may not believe in. Basically, if you don't agree with libertarian ideas on property, then tough shit. They will happily use coercion as a way to make sure that you abide by their definitions. The social contract is valid. Libertarians hate the social contract and will do everything they can to insist it's either invalid or doesn't exist. Probably because even they have trouble insisting that something is coercion when they have the opportunity to decline and walk away. Recently the stock response has been to link to a Stefan Molyneux video which commits the usual error, and that the terms of the social contract are really no different to the terms of private contracts.
So I send a letter to every household in a 10-block radius telling the occupants that I have bought a car on their behalf, that they can choose a Volvo or BMW if they want. If they don't choose, I'm just going to send whatever the majority chooses. The car's delivered to them. Next week, the car cannot be returned. I'm enclosing a bill for $30,000. If they don't want the car, no problem. All they have to do is move to another neighborhood where they will have to choose another car. So let's say I bring this contract for my social contract car dealership to the government and ask them to enforce it. What will the court's response be? Well, they'll call me insane and they will laugh me out of the court.
If I lived in an apartment block owned by Stefan and he insisted I could only continue staying if I paid $30,000 for a car, then any libertarian would tell you that as a property owner he has every right to set whatever terms he likes, and that if I want to continue to live in his block I must comply. If I don't want to comply I must leave. If the guy in the next door apartment says to me that I can only stay in Stefan's apartment on condition that I buy a car from him, any libertarian would say that it was an invalid contract, as the guy next door has no authority to contract in this manner. Libertarians will argue that the state also has no authority to contract, but they're wrong. The state can prove ownership of the land that you live on through means that any libertarian would accept as being binding if they were presented as proof of private ownership. They insist there is a difference, I insist there is no difference. The next one, redistribution of wealth is not wrong. Libertarians argue as if it was self-evidently wrong to take the legitimately owned property of the rich and give it to the poor. But it's not wrong. Redistribution of wealth is inherently good. In fact, it's a moral obligation of the state to ensure its people don't die of starvation or preventable illness, and that every person has food, clothing and somewhere to live. And if making that happen involves redistributing property, then so be it. The idea that funding for doing this should be limited to what people want to pay and to who they want to pay it to, voluntarism, is wrong. If doing this requires taking more money than you're prepared to give, then more money will have to be taken. I consider that to be fair. Libertarians consider it to be unfair. The next one, you cannot keep everything you earn. Your income was not acquired in isolation. If you own a company, then you have benefited from the education of your workforce. If you transport goods across the country, then you have made use of the road network. The fire department will turn up if your store or factory catches fire. The police will turn up if a criminal wants to extort you, and the courts will help you extract money from people who owe it to you. I think it's reasonable to be made to pay for these things. Libertarians think it is unreasonable. It's a difference of opinion. Finally, the state is not perfect. If I choose to live in a state-run society, that doesn't mean that I consider everything the state does to be right or justified. Governments, politicians, civil servants all make mistakes. Some make big mistakes. My preference is still for such a system. There's no debate on this. That's my personal choice. A libertarian can't tell me that I'm wrong any more than he can tell me that blue isn't my favourite colour. I'll admit there's a dilemma. If you want a stateless society and I want a state-run society, then one of us is going to be disappointed. But I don't think it's going to be me.